again. It seems to be working now. Okay, so how to print using the Epson printer driver from Adobe Photoshop. So basically, you're going to first get your image up there, get it the way you want it. You can have layers. Most of the time when you guys are printing, you're going to be printing to the 8.5 by 11 pages. So a few layers is okay. But generally, you're going to want to, let me just throw a curve on here really quickly to kind of make my point. You're going to want to flatten your image. There we go. By going over here and doing flatten image and get it down to a flattened layer. Now the reason for that is you don't want to be sending any more info to the printer than you really need to. 8.5 by 11, not a problem. Later in the quarter, we're going to print 24 by 36 images, so kind of the same size as the Casper's poster out there. You want to send as small a file as you possibly can so you're not kind of bogging down the printer. The next thing you want to do is double check your image size. So you're going to come into image, image size, and in here you're going to see this particular image is set to 14 by 9 inches at a resolution of 300. 300 is your pixels per inch, is your recommended resolution for printing. Your lowest resolution that you can print at is 150 pixels per inch. Below that, you're going to have the image do what's called fall apart. You're going to be able to see the pixels. It'll be grainy looking. We'll talk a little bit more about this later in the quarter, but go ahead. You said that 150 pixels per inch is for, say that one more time. 150 is the lowest that you can have, okay? That's the lowest amount of pixels per inch resolution, yes, that you can have. So where it says resolution here, I'm at 300. This is fine. 72 is screen resolution. So when I have you guys convert to 72, that's just because I need to see it on the screen. I'm not going to print it. 150 is the lowest. 300 is ideal. You want to be at 300. More than 300 is more information. You don't need it. Okay? So if you have an image that's at resolution of 500, that's more information than you need to be sending the printer. You're not going to see the difference. It's not going to help you any. Just a quick refresh. If for some reason you need to change the resolution of your image, you want to make sure that all three of these are connected. So if I wanted to drop my image down to 72, notice that this changes, gets larger, okay? If I want to set it at 150, the largest I could print this image at is 30 by 20. You'll notice the image size is not changing any, okay? Quick review there. If I need to change my image size, so I'm going to put this back at 300. If I need to change my image size to go smaller, I want to unclick, or I want to make sure resample is clicked, excuse me, and then I want to make whatever side is the long side. In this case, the 14 is the long side. It is longer than 9. I'm going to make that 10 so that I can ensure it fits on my 8 by 10, 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. You can do this here. It's not totally necessary. There's another place I'm going to show you where to do it as well, so I'm going to cancel out of this. All right, so image is ready to print. I'm going to come to File, Print, and this is going to bring up the Adobe print dialog box in a second when we're done with the pinwheel. Still waiting. Okay, there we go. So this is where, if you guys are looking at that print 101 I gave you, it should start on this page. It's going to be slightly different because from, I think that was taken with CS4 through CC, the print dialog box has changed a little bit. So the first thing we want to do is make sure we're printing to the correct printer, all right? So if you see this little drop down here, I have all the printers that are shared to this computer available. I'm going to be printing on the 4880p case, so I'm going to select that. The next thing I want to do is go into print settings. Now this is where sometimes it gets a little bit confusing. After a while, this is going to become just straight up like rote memorization for you guys. You're just going to be able to go click, 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 and run through it. So in this case, I want to show details so I can see my entire print dialog box. Double check that I have the correct printer chosen. I do. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to choose my paper size. So in this paper size option, you'll notice there's a whole bunch of different sizes in here. US letter is the equivalency to 8.5 by 11. Okay, so that's pretty much going to be the one you're going to go with. Notice over here as this little drop down opens up, I have many different options for US letter. For right now, we're going to stick with just straight up US letter. Don't worry about maximize, borderless, auto expand, any of that. Just stick with US letter. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to come to where it says layout, and we're going to drop down layout, and we're going to go into printer settings. So under printer settings, this is where you tell the printer what kind of paper you're using, what kind of media type you're using, how you want to manage some various aspects of color. So first off, we're going to make sure it says sheet, all right? If it says something other than sheet, you did not choose the right setting up here, all right? If it says roll paper or something other than sheet, revisit this. Next, you're going to tell the computer where you want the paper to come from. So most of these printers have multiple options of feeding the paper. There's what's referred to as a manual feed and a paper tray feed. We're going to go with the paper tray feed. That's where you stick it in the tray and it kind of gets sucked up into the printer just like we did with the nozzle check. Paper tray. Media type. Now, if we take a look at my thing of paper here, it's pretty obvious that my media type here is glossy. Now, this is just kind of junk paper that the store had a while ago. It's great for giving you guys examples. It didn't cost me a lot of money. Epson papers are designed to go with Epson printers, and this is why I recommend you guys use them because the media type is made blatantly obvious. So if I click on here, you'll notice under photo paper, I have premium luster photo paper, premium glossy photo paper, semi-matte, semi-gloss, so on and so forth. So they all line up nicely. Go ahead. Yes, the Epson brand paper. That's fine. Oh, Canon's going to be fun. That's fine. I want you guys to try non-Epson papers. And one of the things you have to do is you have to go on the internet and look up what the manufacturer says is the Epson equivalency. So for instance, if you are using a Moab Lassell paper, it's going to tell you you're going to want to print with media type, Epson, yada, 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 whatever. Okay? So you have to find that information. We'll go over that a little bit later. Notice here that there are two different numbers after each one of these. So I have Epson Glossy 250, and then I also have Premium Glossy 170. That is referred to as the weight of the paper. That is basically the thickness of the paper. So you'll notice my nozzle check is pretty thin. This paper is listed as I can't remember which one it is, and it doesn't have it very obviously. This is a 750 grams per mil, I think is what it's referred to, GSM. And you'll notice this is a little bit, it's thicker than my nozzle check piece of paper in that it's more like cardboard, okay? But it's not quite as thick as some of the other papers you guys are going to deal with. You need to know that because the printer needs to know that as well. So we're going to choose, in this case, I'm going to go with the glossy paper and choose that. Print mode is basically color or advanced black and white or black. We want to go with the AccuPhoto HD. That is the color option. All right. So this should always pretty much be set to that. You guys probably won't need to change this. Color mode, we're going to go to no color management off. The reason for this is we want to go with no color management off is we want Adobe Photoshop to handle the color management, not the Epson printer. All right, we'll hit another dialog box with this in a minute. So we're going to go with this, and then we're going to talk about output resolution. Output resolution is how much ink is put on the piece of paper. Okay, so we talked about how the nozzle check or the nozzle sprays out the ink on the paper. This is how much it sprays out. For your glossy papers, 1440 is fine. For your matte papers, you want to try to go with 720 if it gives you the option. The reason for that is the matte papers absorb the ink in a way that the glossy papers don't. With the glossy papers, the ink sits pretty much on top, so you can put more down. It's not going to get sucked into the paper. And you'll notice a little bit of a difference, but it won't be huge. With the matte paper, you don't want all that ink in the matte paper. It almost tends to feel like wet newspaper afterwards if you put too much ink down. Quaz, you look confused. 720. 720. So you see fine, or super photo and super photo 2880. You're not going to need to use the 2880. It's not really going to be visually different between the 1440, and it's basically using double the amount of ink on the same size piece of paper, which is wasteful. So we're going to go with the 1440, and again, 9 times out of 10, this is going to be checked for you. High speed basically determines how the printer is putting the ink down. You guys remember the old school typewriters? You type and then it would go ding and you have to pull it back. So if you have high speed unchecked, that's how the ink is put down. It's sprayed in one direction and then the print head moves back. High speed, it's spraying in both directions. Okay, so like, any printer would print in both directions. It allows the print to come out a little bit faster. You're probably not going to notice a whole lot of difference between checked and unchecked. The only reason you'd really want to uncheck it is for some reason if the printer was really old and things weren't lining up correctly and you could see a discrepancy between those two crosses. Our printers, luckily, knock on wood, haven't had that problem, so high speed is fine. Okay, so this is pretty much your base settings for this particular dialog box. You're going to hit save. And you'll notice, we're going to get the pinwheel again. And you'll notice now we need to go on to this next, my bad. Next thing we need to do is turn this to landscape. So it is the correct orientation. So you have portrait is up like this, landscape is sideways. So portrait mode, landscape mode. You guys are familiar with that. It doesn't fit on the page. I get that. We'll get there in a second. Manages colors. All right, color management. This is important. All right. Remember how we said we want Adobe to manage colors. We don't want Epson to manage colors. This is where we make that decision. We want Photoshop manages colors. All right. This is kind of the bread and butter of this class. Once we change that, all of this is going to become live for us to change things. Now you'll notice here in my drop down, I have all the profiles that we were kind of talking about earlier when we were doing our profile conversions. For this particular, what we're doing here printing wise, we need any of these 4880 profiles. So you'll notice there's Epson SP 4880, there's Pro 4880, there's also 7880 and 990, and 980. I don't think I have the 2880 on here. But you'll notice that each particular printer has its own set of profiles, okay? And that's because each printer is considered a device. It's its own device. It's different from other printers. Now, if we notice, there's a whole bunch of different types of profiles for that printer. And the reason for that is each paper is also considered a device. So each paper has to have its own profile. It's not going to work if you have the wrong profile. The color will look off. So when you think about printing, you're thinking about dealing with two devices. You're dealing with the printer as well as the paper, and the profile needs to reflect that. All right, so for this one, I don't think I have this particular paper's profile in here because this is the Swarthmore kind of junk paper. So I'm going to go with something that is going to be equivalent. Now, I'm going to make an educated guess on what will be equivalent. You guys are not going to make educated guesses on what will be equivalent, all right? Ask me if you're not sure which profile to use. You guys are going to, for the notebook, make your own profiles. That's kind of part of the project. So in this case, because I know this is pretty similar to Epson Glossy, I'm going to use the Pro 4880 PGPP170. Now, PGPP stands for Premium Glossy Photo Paper. Each company, Epson, Canon, Hewlett-Packard, Innova, all those different paper companies I told you guys about, have their own specific way of naming a profile. All right, now they're kind of like code, and they're each different. We also in the lab here have a specific way for naming a profile. I'll get to that a little bit later. And the reason is you want to be able to look at that profile and kind of understand what printer and what paper it's for and a few other things. So, naming it Sarah does not help anyone. All right, so I'm going to choose my PGPP170 profile. I'm going to make sure that it says normal printing. Remember, my rendering intent is relative colorimetric, and that black point compensation is checked. Now, if we take a look at this little dialog box up here, we have a couple things going on. We have the piece of paper orientated landscape-wise. We also know there's a big hunk over here that has that lines through it. The lines are the non-printable area of the paper. All right, the printer deems those areas of the paper unprintable. The reason that there's a big hunk over here is because the printer needs to actually have something to grab onto as far as the paper is concerned to pull it through the printer. So it deems that area not printable. So when I actually scroll down here and notice my position and sizing, I can click Scale to Fit Media, and my image is going to shrink to fit on the piece of paper. Now, if your image is shrinking, that's fine. You want to scale down. You don't want to be scaling up to fit media. So if you have a tiny little picture, and you hit scale to fit media and it gets bigger, you don't want to do that. Why not? Okay, good question. The reason for that is that whole resolution thing we were talking about a minute or two ago. When you scale and it goes up, it either does one of two things. Stretches out that resolution, so it's going to look pixely when you print it, or it's going to try to create more resolution to fit in that space. All right, so it's kind of, you want to always funnel down. You don't want to be going up. All right, so it's just not a good way to manage it. If you need to make the image larger to fit on the printer paper, if you want to make the picture bigger, there's other ways to do that, and we'll go over that a little bit later in the quarter. So make sure you're scaling down to fit on the piece of paper. You're not going bigger. All right, now the other thing to notice here too is now none of these are highlighted for me. You'll also notice that my print is going to be a little off center, all right, because of this big hunk right here. It's going to be moved a little bit to the side. Don't worry about that. I know some of you guys get a little OCD, like, I want the print right in the middle. Don't worry about that. I'm not concerned about having the print right in the middle of the paper. This is fine. You'll also notice down here we have match print colors. So if I turn that on and off, it's going to give me kind of a preview of what it'll look like on the paper. And show paper white is also going to preview that particular paper whiteness. So each paper has, some are brighter than others, some are more yellow, some are what are called cool tone. Showing that paper white is going to give you a preview. And then gamut warning is going to warn you if any colors are not really able to be reproduced by the printer. This is something you want to turn on when you're printing. All right, beyond that, the rest of these, you really won't need to pay attention to. Crop marks and corners, if you're experimenting with cutting things and you want to, print a bunch of images on one page or something like that, that might be the place to play with that. But you guys, for most purposes, will not need that. You will not need these function options, and you're not going to have to worry about PostScript either. So, quick review. Make sure you have the right printer. Make sure you're going in and setting your print settings for each specific type of paper, what media type you're using, as well as what size the paper is, as well as where it's coming from in the printer. Is it coming from the tray or manual feed? Color handling, always Photoshop manages colors. There are a few exceptions, but those are rare. And then your printer profile, remember that is determining your paper and printer combination. So in this case, my printer is the 4880, the PK, and the paper is going to be something equivalent to Epson Glossy. Relative color metric, black point compensation. All right, at this point, we should be ready to go. Now, if I was sitting right next to the printer, I'd hit print, load up my piece of paper, and I'd be good to go. But since it's across the room, I'm not going to do that.